The dust cloud rising from the stagecoach accident could be seen for miles across the Colorado plains, and Rose Patterson knew her chances of reaching California before winter had just disappeared along with the broken wheel that now lay splintered against the rocky trail. She stood beside the damaged coach with 3 other passengers, all of them staring helplessly at the driver who kept shaking his head and muttering about how they were still 2 days from Denver, and at least a week from anywhere that mattered. The year was 1873, and Rose had exactly $12 to her name, a small trunk of belongings, and a burning need to reach San Francisco before her sister's baby arrived in late October. The other passengers had already begun negotiating with a freight wagon that had stopped to assess the situation. But the driver made it clear he only had room for 2, and Rose watched as a portly businessman and an elderly woman climbed aboard, leaving her and a young clerk stranded on the empty road. The freight wagon disappeared into the afternoon heat, and the clerk decided he would walk back to the last town they had passed, convinced he could make it before nightfall. Rose knew better than to attempt such a journey in her long skirts and thin boots, so she stayed with the stagecoach driver who promised to wait for help, though his eyes kept darting nervously toward the horizon, where storm clouds were beginning to gather. Hours passed with agonizing slowness, and Rose paced beside the coach, calculating and recalculating her dwindling options. The driver finally unhitched the horses and announced he was riding back for help, leaving Rose alone with the damaged coach and her increasingly desperate thoughts. She was contemplating whether to start walking despite the approaching darkness when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. A lone rider appeared on the trail, sitting tall in his saddle, leading a pack horse behind him. As he drew closer, Rose could make out a man in his mid-20s, wearing a dark hat pulled low against the sun, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and carrying himself with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this harsh landscape. He slowed his horse as he approached, taking in the scene with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Rose straightened her spine and met his gaze. The stage broke down. The other passengers found alternative transport, and the driver went for help hours ago. "I need to reach California as soon as possible." The cowboy dismounted with fluid grace and walked around the damaged coach, examining the broken wheel with a practiced eye. "This coach will not be going anywhere for days, maybe longer. The nearest town with a proper wheelwright is back east, and even then, finding the right parts will take time." "I understand that," Rose said, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. "I am asking if you know of any way I might continue west. I can pay, though not much. My sister is expecting her first child, and I promised I would be there." He studied her for a long moment, and Rose became acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after hours in the sun and dust. Her dark blonde hair had mostly escaped its pins, her gray traveling dress was covered in dirt, and she could feel perspiration dampening her collar. But the cowboy's expression remained neutral, thoughtful rather than judgmental. "I am Cole Michaels, heading to California myself. Got a ranch waiting for me near Sacramento, inherited from my uncle who passed last spring. Been working cattle in Texas these past years, saved enough to stock the place proper and make a real go of it." He paused, adjusting his hat as he seemed to consider his next words carefully. "The trail ahead is not suitable for a woman traveling alone. There are rough elements between here and the Sierra Nevada, and the weather turns unpredictable come September." "I am aware of the dangers," Rose said quietly, "but I have no choice. My sister Rebecca is alone out there. Her husband died in a mining accident 6 months ago, and she has no one else. I must reach her." Cole nodded slowly, then surprised her by asking, "You have family back east, someone expecting you to return?" "No. My parents passed from fever 3 years ago. Rebecca and I are all that remains of the Pattersons." The storm clouds were moving closer now, and the first rumble of distant thunder rolled across the plains. Cole looked at the sky, then back at Rose, and she saw him reach some kind of decision. "I will take you west," he said. "But not as a passenger or hired help. The trail is too dangerous, too long for that kind of arrangement. If you come with me, you come as my wife." Rose felt her breath catch. "I beg your pardon. I am not being improper," Cole said quickly, his expression serious. "I am being practical. A man and woman traveling together, unmarried, would cause talk in every town we pass, make finding supplies and shelter more difficult. More than that, there are men on these trails who would see a woman traveling as a paid companion and draw conclusions that would put you in danger. As my wife, you would have my protection, my name, and safe passage west. When we reach California, if you want to go your separate way to your sister, I will not stop you. But for the journey, this is the only way I can see it working." "You are asking me to marry you," Rose said slowly, trying to process the sudden turn her circumstances had taken. "A complete stranger. I am offering you passage west, which is what you need, and I am being honest about the only terms that make sense for both of us. I know it is not conventional, but nothing about this situation is." He glanced at the darkening sky again. "That storm will be here within the hour. You need to decide now. I can take you back to the last town we passed, leave you there to wait for the next stage, which might come in days or weeks. Or you can take my offer, and we can reach Denver by tomorrow evening, find a preacher, and continue west as husband and wife." Rose looked at the broken stagecoach, at the empty road stretching in both directions, at the storm bearing down on them. She thought of Rebecca, alone and frightened in San Francisco, counting on her to be there. She thought of the very real dangers Cole had mentioned, dangers she had heard whispered about by other women traveling west, stories of attacks and worse things that could befall a woman alone. She looked at Cole Michaels, this stranger who sat calmly waiting for her answer. His face was weathered but honest, his eyes direct but not unkind. Everything about him spoke of competence and reliability, from the well-maintained gear on his horses to the way he carried himself. It was insane to even consider his proposal, and yet it was the only option that actually solved her problem. "If I agree," she said carefully, "you would expect this to be a real marriage." Cole met her eyes steadily. "I would expect us to treat each other with respect and honesty. Beyond that, we would figure things out as we go. I am not asking for anything improper, Miss Patterson. I am asking if you are willing to take a chance on a long trail west with a man who gives you his word he will see you safely through it." The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy with the promise of a downpour. Rose took a deep breath and extended her hand. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Michaels. I will come west as your wife." Cole shook her hand firmly, then immediately moved into action. "We need to get ahead of this storm. Can you ride?" "Yes, though it has been a few years." "Good enough." He moved to the stagecoach and retrieved Rose's small trunk, securing it efficiently to his pack horse. "Take only what you absolutely need from here. We will replace what we can in Denver." Rose grabbed her reticule with her money and papers, a small bag with personal items, and a photograph of her and Rebecca taken the year before their parents died. Within minutes, Cole had helped her mount his main horse, settling her sideways in the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, and Rose tried not to think about how improper this all was, how she was riding pressed against a strange man who had just proposed marriage under the most bizarre circumstances imaginable. They rode hard ahead of the storm, and Cole proved to be an excellent horseman, guiding them off the main trail to a rock overhang he seemed to know about. They reached it just as the storm broke fully, and Rose found herself huddled under the shelter with Cole as rain poured down in sheets, turning the world beyond their rocky refuge into a blur of water and wind. Cole set about building a small fire with dry wood he had stored in his pack, and soon had coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. He handed Rose a tin cup and some dried beef and biscuits from his supplies, and they sat in awkward silence for a while, the magnitude of what they had agreed to settling over them both. "Tell me about your sister," Cole said finally, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the rain. "Rebecca, you said." Rose nodded, grateful for the normalcy of conversation. "She is 2 years older than me. She married Thomas Porter 5 years ago, and they went west full of dreams about making their fortune in the gold fields. Thomas was a good man, steady and hardworking. When the mining did not pan out, he found work as an engineer in one of the bigger operations. Rebecca wrote that they were finally saving money, finally building something. Then the letter came in April about the accident, a tunnel collapse. Thomas and 4 other men were killed." "I am sorry," Cole said, and his sympathy sounded genuine. "That is a hard thing. Rebecca is strong, but she should not have to face this alone. The baby is due in 6 weeks, and she wrote that she has some friends in San Francisco, other mining widows, but no real family. I have to be there for her." "And you will be," Cole said with quiet confidence. "We will make good time once we are past Denver. I know the trails, and I have enough money to keep us supplied and avoid the worst camping. If the weather holds and we have no major delays, we can reach Sacramento in 5 weeks, maybe less. San Francisco is just a few days beyond that." Rose studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Why are you doing this? You could have ridden past the broken stagecoach, avoided all this complication." Cole was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My mother traveled west alone after my father died. I was too young to remember much, but I know she faced things no woman should have to face alone. She got us to Texas safely, but it cost her something, left her harder and more bitter than she should have been. When I saw you standing there, determined and scared and trying not to show it, I thought maybe I could help someone else's journey go a little easier." "That is a kind impulse," Rose said softly, "but marriage is a significant commitment to make on impulse." "It is," Cole agreed, "but I am 26 years old and I have been thinking it is time to settle down, build something lasting. I have a ranch waiting, 300 acres of good land with water rights and timber. It is a place that needs a family, not just a lone cowboy. I am not saying this to pressure you, just being honest. When we reach California, if you want to leave, I meant what I said. But I also would not object if you found the arrangement suited you well enough to keep it." Rose absorbed this, understanding dawning. "So this is not entirely altruistic. You need a wife to make your ranch work." "A ranch works better with a partnership," Cole admitted. "But I would not ask you to stay if you were unhappy. That would not be fair to either of us." The rain continued through the evening, and they talked more as darkness fell, sharing stories of their lives and slowly beginning to know each other. Rose learned that Cole had been working cattle since he was 14, that he could read and write well thanks to his mother's insistence on education, that he had a steady temperament and a wry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed a little. Cole learned that Rose had worked as a schoolteacher for 2 years before the school board decided they needed a man for the position, that she loved reading and had strong opinions about everything from politics to proper horse care. that beneath her proper Eastern manners was a sharp intelligence and a stubborn determination that matched his own. They slept that night on opposite sides of the fire, both fully clothed and carefully maintaining propriety despite the intimacy of their situation. When Rose woke in the gray dawn, she found Cole already up, checking the horses and preparing for the day's ride. They reached Denver late the following afternoon, riding into the bustling town as the sun cast long shadows across the wide streets. Denver in 1873 was a town caught between frontier roughness and civilized aspirations, with new brick buildings rising beside older wooden structures, and crowds of people representing every class and profession moving along the boardwalks. Cole found them a respectable boarding house run by a stern widow named Mrs. Callahan, securing 2 separate rooms and explaining that they were an engaged couple traveling west to be married. The widow softened at this romantic notion and showed them to clean, simple rooms with promises of a hot meal within the hour. Rose stood in her small room, looking at herself in the spotted mirror above the washstand. She looked travel-worn and weary, her dress hopelessly wrinkled and her hair a disaster. Tomorrow she would marry a man she had known for barely 2 days. It seemed impossible, reckless, completely mad. Yet when she thought about the alternative, about being stranded and delayed while Rebecca waited alone, the decision still felt right. She washed as best she could and changed into her only other dress, a simple brown wool that was more practical than pretty, but at least was clean. When she came downstairs for dinner, she found Cole already waiting, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. They ate dinner with the other boarders, a mix of travelers and permanent residents, and Cole introduced Rose as his fiancée with such natural ease that she almost believed it herself. After dinner, they walked through Denver's streets as the evening settled in, and Cole showed her the practical side of his nature, pointing out the church where they would marry the next day, the general store where they would stock up on supplies, the stable where he would purchase 2 additional horses so Rose could ride independently. "You thought of everything," Rose said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "I have been planning this journey for months," Cole replied. "Just did not know I would have company until yesterday." They stopped in front of the boarding house, both suddenly awkward about parting for the night. Tomorrow everything would change and they both felt the weight of it. "Are you having second thoughts?" Cole asked quietly. Rose considered lying, then decided honesty was better. "I am terrified. But I am also certain I want to do this. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Cole smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "I will see you at the church at 10 tomorrow morning. Sleep well, Rose." "Good night, Cole." Rose barely slept that night, her mind racing through everything that was happening, everything that would happen. When dawn came, she rose and prepared herself with trembling hands, wishing Rebecca was there to help her, to tell her she was not being completely foolish. Mrs. Callahan knocked on her door mid-morning with an unexpected kindness. The widow held a dress of deep blue wool, simple but well made, with ivory buttons down the front. "I thought you might like to borrow this," she said gruffly. "A bride should have something special to wear, even if the circumstances are rushed. You are about my daughter's size, and she left this behind when she married last year." Rose felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected generosity. "Thank you. That is very kind, Mrs." Callahan helped her into the dress and worked on her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both practical and flattering. When Rose looked in the mirror, she saw a bride looking back, and the reality of what she was about to do hit her with full force. The church was small but clean, with morning light streaming through plain glass windows. Cole waited at the front, wearing a dark suit that looked new and fit him well. His expression when he saw Rose walk down the short aisle was one of genuine admiration, and Rose felt her nervousness ease slightly. The preacher was an elderly man named Reverend Thompson, who asked them only a few questions before agreeing to perform the ceremony. He seemed to sense this was not a typical wedding, but in the West of 1873, few things were typical, and he had learned not to judge too harshly. Mrs. Callahan and her husband served as witnesses, both standing solemnly as the Reverend led Cole and Rose through their vows. When Cole took Rose's hand, his grip was warm and steady, and when he spoke his vows, his voice was firm and clear. Rose's own voice wavered only slightly as she repeated the words that would bind her to this near stranger, and she found herself meaning them more than she had expected. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her briefly, chastely, a simple press of lips that nonetheless sent a flutter through Rose's stomach. They were married. She was Rose Michaels now, bound to a cowboy heading west to build a ranch, and her old life as Rose Patterson, Eastern school teacher, felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. They spent their wedding day in practical preparations, visiting the general store to purchase supplies, the stable to select horses, and a dressmaker who sold Rose several ready-made dresses more suitable for trail travel than her Eastern clothes. Cole paid for everything without complaint, making it clear that his savings were solid enough to support them both comfortably. That evening, Mrs. Callahan hosted a small wedding dinner, inviting several other boarders and making an unexpected celebration of the occasion. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and even some dancing in the boarding house parlor. Cole proved to be a decent dancer, leading Rose through a simple waltz with quiet confidence, and for a few hours, it almost felt like a real wedding celebration rather than a marriage of convenience. But eventually, the evening ended and they faced the question that had been hovering unspoken all day. They were married now, and the two separate rooms no longer made sense. Cole addressed it directly as they climbed the stairs. "I will keep my room tonight," he said quietly. "We can continue as we have been until you feel more comfortable with the situation." Rose felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something more complicated. "Thank you. I appreciate your consideration." "We have a long journey ahead," Cole said. "No need to rush anything." They parted at Rose's door, and this time when Cole said goodnight, he kissed her hand in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and sweet. Rose went to bed as a married woman sleeping alone, grateful for Cole's patience and surprised by how much she had enjoyed their wedding day. They left Denver 3 days later, well supplied and ready for the long trail west. Rose rode her own horse now, a steady mare named Daisy that the stable owner swore was as reliable as sunrise. Cole rode his buckskin gelding, leading 2 pack horses loaded with supplies enough to see them through to Sacramento. The first week of travel established patterns between them. They rose with the dawn, traveled hard through the morning, stopped for a midday meal and rest for the horses, then continued until late afternoon when they would make camp. Cole proved to be a skilled outdoorsman, always seeming to know where to find water and shelter, how to read the weather and the land. Rose made herself useful, cooking their meals and managing their supplies with careful efficiency, drawing on skills learned from years of managing a household on a teacher's meager salary. They talked as they rode, the hours in the saddle providing ample time for conversation. Rose told Cole about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who took in sewing, about the modest but loving home they had maintained, until fever swept through their town and took them both within a week of each other. Cole spoke of Texas, of the hard work and harder men who worked the cattle ranches, of learning his trade through experience and determination, of saving every spare dollar for years to make his California dream possible. At night, they maintained careful propriety, sleeping on opposite sides of their campfire, but there were small intimacies that grew between them nonetheless. The way Cole would help Rose down from her horse at the end of a long day, his hands steady at her waist. The way Rose would brush trail dust from Cole's shoulders while he tended the fire. The comfortable silences that fell between them, no longer awkward but peaceful. 2 weeks into their journey, they were camped in the foothills of the Rockies when a group of 4 men rode into their camp just after sunset. Rose felt Cole tense immediately, saw his hand move casually toward the rifle that lay within reach. "Evening," the leader of the group called out, a rough-looking man with a scar across his cheek. "Saw your fire. Wondered if you might have coffee to share." "We have coffee," Cole said evenly, not quite friendly but not hostile. "You are welcome to a cup if you keep things neighborly." The men dismounted, and Rose noted how Cole positioned himself between her and the strangers, casual but deliberate. She poured coffee with steady hands, refusing to show the fear that had her heart pounding. The scarred man introduced himself as Jake Brennan, and his companions with vague gestures and no names. They made small talk about the trail and the weather, but Rose could feel them assessing the camp, noting supplies and valuables. Jake's eyes kept drifting to Rose in a way that made her skin crawl. "That is a pretty wife you have there," Jake said, and the way he said it made the words feel threatening. "Must be interesting traveling with a woman. Gets lonely out here." "My wife and I are heading to our ranch in California," Cole said, his voice hardening. "We are keeping to ourselves and not looking for trouble." "No trouble here," Jake said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Just friendly conversation." But one of Jake's men had wandered too close to their supply packs, and Cole stood smoothly, his movement putting him next to his rifle. "I think you have finished your coffee. Time for you to move along." The tension in the camp ratcheted up immediately. Jake's hand drifted toward his pistol, and Rose held her breath, terrified violence was about to erupt. But Cole stood utterly calm, rifle now in his hands but pointed at the ground, his eyes locked on Jake's. "We are all reasonable men here," Cole said quietly. "You have had your coffee and your rest. Now you ride on and we will forget this visit ever happened, or this can go another way and I promise you will not like how it ends." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Jake laughed, a forced sound, and gestured to his men. "No harm meant, friend. We will leave you to your evening." They mounted and rode off, but Cole kept watch for hours after, insisting Rose sleep while he maintained guard. In the morning, he checked their supplies carefully and found nothing missing, then urged they break camp early and make good distance. "Will they come back?" Rose asked as they rode. "I doubt it. They were testing us, seeing if we were easy targets. When we were not, they moved on. Men like that want easy pickings, not a fight." He glanced at her. "You did well, stayed calm, that was good." "I was terrified," Rose admitted. "Being scared and staying calm are not exclusive. You showed courage, Rose." The incident seemed to shift something between them. That night when they made camp, Cole showed Rose how to load and fire his spare pistol, insisting she keep it on her from then on. They practiced together until she could handle the weapon with confidence, and Cole seemed satisfied she could at least defend herself if needed. "I hope you never have to use it," he said as they sat by the fire that evening, "but I need to know you can if you must." They crossed into Utah territory, and the landscape changed to red rock and vast open spaces. They passed through small Mormon settlements where they were able to resupply and sleep in actual beds for a night or two. The settlers were often wary of outsiders but warmed when they learned Cole and Rose were married and heading to a ranch in California. More than once, Rose was taken aside by Mormon women who gave her advice about homesteading and offered small gifts of preserves or bread to help them on their way. In a town called Cedar Creek, they stopped for 3 days to rest the horses and make some repairs to their gear. The town had a small hotel with a bathhouse, and Rose luxuriated in a hot bath and the chance to wash her hair properly. Cole arranged for one room this time rather than two, and Rose noticed but did not comment. That night, they lay in a real bed for the first time as a married couple, a decent space between them but sharing the same covers. Rose lay awake listening to Cole's steady breathing, acutely aware of his presence in a way that was both unsettling and not entirely unpleasant. They had been married for almost a month now, traveling together every day, and Cole had been nothing but respectful and kind. She found herself wondering what it would be like to close the distance between them, to truly become husband and wife in more than just name. As if sensing her thoughts, Cole spoke softly into the darkness. "You doing all right, Rose?" "Yes, just thinking. About how strange this all is. A month ago I was a school teacher in Pennsylvania. Now I am a rancher's wife heading to California. Are you sorry?" Cole asked, and she heard genuine concern in his voice. "No," Rose said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "I am not sorry. This has been hard but also good." "You have been good, Cole, better than I had any right to expect." "You have been good too," Cole said quietly. "I know this is not the marriage you probably dreamed of when you were a girl, but I am glad you are here." Rose turned toward him in the darkness, able to make out his profile in the moonlight coming through the window. "What did you dream of when you were young, before you started planning this ranch?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I dreamed of having a place that was mine, where I could build something lasting. My mother and I never had that, always working other people's land, living in other people's houses. I wanted roots, a home that could not be taken away. And I suppose I dreamed of sharing it with someone, though I never had a clear picture of who that might be. And now I think maybe the picture is getting clearer." They fell asleep that night with their hands clasped between them, a small bridge across the space that separated them. When Rose woke in the early morning, she found herself curled against Cole's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them fitting together with natural ease. Cole woke soon after, and they separated with shy smiles, both pretending the closeness had been accidental, both knowing it had felt right. They left Cedar Creek with renewed supplies and lighter hearts. The trail grew harder as they pushed into Nevada, the landscape turning harsh and unforgiving. Water became scarce, and they had to plan carefully between known springs and streams. The heat was oppressive during the day, and they took to traveling in the early morning and evening, resting during the worst of the afternoon sun. It was in Nevada that Rose first became truly ill. She woke one morning with her head pounding and her stomach churning, barely making it away from camp before being sick. Cole found her pale and shaking, and his face showed real fear. "How long have you felt poorly?" he asked, helping her back to their camp. "Just this morning." "I am sure it will pass." But it did not pass. For 3 days, Rose was miserably ill, unable to keep down food and racked with fever. Cole tended her with gentle care, keeping her cool with damp cloths, forcing her to sip water even when she protested, sitting up through the nights to watch over her. On the 4th day, the fever finally broke, and Rose woke weak but clear-headed to find Cole asleep sitting up beside her, his hand still holding hers. She studied his face in the morning light, this man who had become so important to her so quickly. His features were drawn with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled from days of caring for her, and Rose felt something shift in her chest, a rush of feeling that went beyond gratitude or companionship. She was falling in love with her husband, this good man who had married a stranger to help her reach her sister and had shown her nothing but kindness and respect every day since. When Cole woke, Rose was crying softly and he immediately went on alert. "What is wrong? Are you in pain?" "No," Rose said, smiling through her tears. "I am just grateful. You could have left me in a town, found a doctor, and continued on, but you stayed and took care of me." Cole looked puzzled by this. "You are my wife, Rose. Of course I stayed." "A wife in name only," Rose reminded him gently. "We married as a practical arrangement." "Maybe that is how it started," Cole admitted, brushing a strand of hair back from her face with surprising tenderness. "But somewhere along this trail it became more than that, at least for me." Rose reached up and cupped his face in her hand. "For me too." Cole leaned down and kissed her properly for the first time since their wedding day. And this kiss was different, deeper, full of feeling that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the air between them felt charged with new possibility. "When we make camp tonight," Cole said, his voice rough, "there will be no more distance between us if that is what you want." "That is what I want," Rose said firmly. "I want to be your wife in truth, Cole." They traveled slowly that day as Rose regained her strength, but there was a new energy between them, an anticipation that made every glance and casual touch feel significant. When they made camp that evening by a small stream, Cole took extra care, building a comfortable bed of their blankets and making sure their site was secure and private. That night, they came together as husband and wife fully, and what had begun as a marriage of convenience became a marriage of genuine love and commitment. Cole was patient and tender, and Rose discovered that physical intimacy with someone you cared for deeply was nothing like the clinical descriptions she had heard from married women. It was warm and sweet, and left her feeling more connected to Cole than she had known was possible. They lay afterward under the stars, Cole's arms around Rose, both feeling like their hasty marriage had somehow become exactly what it was meant to be. "I love you," Rose said quietly, the first time either of them had spoken those words. "I know it has only been weeks, but I do." "I love you, Cole Michaels." "I love you too," Cole replied, kissing the top of her head. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you stood beside that broken stagecoach looking so determined not to give up. You have courage, Rose. You have heart. I am lucky to have you." They continued west with renewed purpose and deepened affection. The trail was still hard, the conditions often challenging, but they faced everything together now as true partners. They talked about their future, about the ranch that waited and what they would build there together. Cole described the land his uncle had left him, the house that needed work but had good bones, the creek that ran year-round and provided water for cattle and crops alike. Rose shared her hopes too, her desire to maybe start a school once they were settled, her dreams of a home filled with children and laughter, her determination to help Rebecca get back on her feet once the baby was born. They planned and dreamed together, the miles passing beneath their horses' hooves as their future took shape in words and wishes. They crossed the Sierra Nevada in early October, the mountain passes already showing signs of approaching winter. It was hard travel, the altitude affecting them both, the nights cold enough that they huddled together for warmth. But the views were spectacular, and Rose found herself awed by the wild beauty of the mountains, the vast forests and clear streams that seemed to stretch forever. When they finally descended the western slope and saw the Sacramento Valley spread before them, green and fertile and welcoming, Rose felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. They had made it. They had crossed the better part of a continent together and arrived at their destination as true partners, their unlikely marriage now the foundation of everything they would build. Cole's ranch was everything he had described and more. The house was a simple two-story structure that needed paint and repairs, but was fundamentally solid. 300 acres of rolling grassland stretched around it, with stands of oak trees and a creek that sparkled in the California sunshine. There were outbuildings that needed work, fences that needed mending, and 100 tasks waiting to be done. But Rose saw only potential and possibility. They spent their first night in the house, sleeping on a mattress Cole's uncle had left behind, too exhausted from travel to do more than collapse into sleep. But in the morning, they woke to California sunshine and began the work of making the ranch their home. Over the next week, they threw themselves into settling in. Cole rode into Sacramento to arrange for the delivery of cattle he had paid for months ago, to order supplies and establish credit at the local bank. Rose cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away years of bachelor neglect, making lists of what they needed to make the place livable. They worked together to make basic repairs, Cole impressed by Rose's willingness to climb ladders and wield a hammer, Rose appreciating Cole's knowledge of construction and his patient teaching. 10 days after their arrival in California, they made the journey to San Francisco to find Rebecca. Rose was nervous as they rode into the city, worried about what condition they would find her sister in, hoping they were not too late. They located Rebecca's address in a modest neighborhood, a boarding house not unlike Mrs. Callahan's in Denver. Rebecca answered the door herself, heavily pregnant and looking exhausted but breaking into tears of joy when she saw Rose. The sisters embraced for a long moment, both crying, both overwhelmed with relief at being reunited. Then Rose pulled back and introduced Cole, watching as Rebecca's confused expression took in the wedding ring on Rose's finger. "You are married?" Rebecca asked, looking between them in shock. "It is a long story," Rose said with a laugh. "May we come in? I want to hear how you are, and I need to tell you about everything that has happened." They spent the afternoon with Rebecca, and Rose shared the story of the broken stagecoach, Cole's proposal, their journey west, and their growing love. Cole liked Rebecca immediately, seeing the family resemblance between the sisters, appreciating her strength and humor despite her circumstances. Rebecca was delighted that Rose had found happiness and clearly approved of Cole, teasing Rose about falling in love with a cowboy. But as they talked, Rose became increasingly worried about Rebecca's living situation. The boarding house was clean but cramped, and Rebecca admitted she had very little money saved, that she was anxious about what would happen after the baby came, and she could no longer take in sewing work. Rose and Cole stepped outside to talk privately, and Rose did not even have to voice her thoughts before Cole was nodding. "She should come to the ranch. We have plenty of room and you will want to be near her anyway, especially after the baby comes." "Are you sure?" Rose asked. "It would mean having a newborn in the house, and Rebecca might be with us for months or even longer. She is your sister and she needs help. Of course I am sure." Cole smiled and pulled Rose close. "Besides, a ranch feels more like a home when it has family filling it up." They went back inside and made the offer, and Rebecca was initially reluctant, not wanting to impose. But Rose insisted, and eventually, Rebecca agreed, relief and gratitude clear on her face. They helped her pack her belongings and hired a wagon to transport her things to the ranch. Rebecca riding beside them as they made the journey back to Sacramento. Having Rebecca at the ranch changed the dynamic, but in mostly good ways. The sisters were thrilled to be together again after so long apart, and the house felt warmer with 3 people instead of 2. Rebecca pitched in where she could, though Rose and Cole both insisted she rest as much as possible with the baby due any day. Cole worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the cattle that would arrive soon, repairing fences and building shelters, hiring 2 local men to help with the heavy work. Rose divided her time between making the house a proper home and preparing for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes, and setting up a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms. 2 weeks after Rebecca's arrival, she went into labor in the middle of the night. Rose and Cole sprang into action, Cole riding into town to fetch the midwife while Rose stayed with Rebecca, helping her through the contractions and trying not to show her own fear. The midwife arrived just in time, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered hundreds of babies, and approached the task with calm efficiency. Labor lasted through the night and into the next day, and Cole paced the front porch, occasionally checking if he was needed but mostly staying out of the way as Rose and Mrs. Cheng coached Rebecca through the hardest work of her life. Finally, as the sun began to set, the sharp cry of a newborn filled the house, and Cole heard Rose calling for him. He entered the bedroom to find Rebecca exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets Rose had sewn. "It is a boy," Rebecca said, her voice full of wonder. "A healthy baby boy. What will you name him?" Rose asked, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her nephew. "Thomas," Rebecca said softly. "After his father, Thomas Michael Porter." Cole felt a lump in his throat, honored that Rebecca had chosen to include a version of his name. He looked at Rose and saw the same emotion reflected on her face. They had become a family, the 3 adults in this tiny new life, bound together by circumstance and choice and love. The months that followed were busy and full. Cole's cattle arrived, 50 head of good stock that he and his hired hands worked to settle onto the ranch. The animals took to the land well, and Cole's experienced eye told him they would thrive here. He began planning for spring breeding and thinking about expanding his herd once they had the first season under their belts. Rose and Rebecca fell into an easy partnership, sharing the work of running the household and caring for baby Thomas. The sisters were happy together, making up for the years they had been apart, supporting each other through the challenges of their new lives. Rebecca's strength gradually returned, and though she grieved her lost husband, she found joy in her son and comfort in being with family. As winter settled in, mild by the standards of the East, but still requiring fires in the evenings, the ranch began to feel established. Cole hired a third hand, a young man named Jim who had ranching experience and a willingness to work hard. The fences were all repaired, the outbuildings weatherproofed, and the cattle settled into their grazing patterns. Cole began to feel like they might actually make success of this venture. Rose started a small school in town, teaching children 3 days a week in a room above the general store. She loved the work, and the extra income helped, though Cole made sure she knew they did not need the money, that he was proud of her for following her passion. The children adored her, and Rose thrived on their energy and curiosity. Rebecca announced in February that she planned to stay permanently at the ranch if Cole and Rose would have her. She had been corresponding with a lawyer in San Francisco about Thomas's estate, and it turned out her late husband had a small insurance policy she had not known about. The payout was not huge, but enough to let her contribute to the ranch expenses and maintain her independence. She wanted to help make the ranch succeed, to give Thomas a home and a family, and a good future. Cole and Rose welcomed her enthusiastically, both happy to have her as a permanent part of their family. They drew up proper papers making Rebecca a partner in the ranch, giving her a stake in its success. The arrangement worked beautifully, with Rebecca managing the household and helping with the books while Rose taught and Cole ran the cattle operation. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The cattle bred successfully, and they were expecting calves in early summer. Rose discovered she was pregnant, and the entire household celebrated the news. Cole was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a father, already planning additions to the house to accommodate their growing family. Rose's pregnancy was easier than Rebecca's had been, and she continued teaching until she began showing too much for propriety. The children gave her a tearful farewell party, making her promise to return after the baby came. Rose assured them she would, though she was secretly unsure how she would balance teaching with motherhood. But that was a problem for later. In early August, Rose went into labor, and this time Cole was the one pacing anxiously while Rebecca attended his wife with Mrs. Chen's help. The labor was shorter than Rebecca's had been, and when the baby arrived with a lusty cry, Cole rushed in to find Rose exhausted but glowing, holding their daughter. "She is perfect," Rose said, looking up at Cole with such love it made his chest ache. "Absolutely perfect." Cole cradled his daughter carefully, marveling at her tiny features, her shock of dark hair, her miniature fists waving in the air. "What should we name her?" Rose had been thinking about this for months. "Catherine, after your mother, Catherine Marie Michaels." Cole's eyes filled with tears. His mother had died 5 years ago, alone in Texas, and he had always regretted not being able to give her an easier life. Naming his daughter for her felt like honoring her memory, giving her a place in the family she had sacrificed so much to protect. "Catherine Marie," he repeated softly. "It is perfect." The ranch flourished over the next several years. Cole's herd grew steadily, gaining a reputation for quality, and he began selling breeding stock to other ranchers in addition to beef cattle. Rose returned to teaching part-time once Catherine was old enough, and the school in town thrived under her guidance. Rebecca proved to have a gift for managing money, keeping the ranch books with meticulous care, and making smart decisions about investments and expenses. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and followed Cole everywhere, learning about cattle and horses and the land. Catherine was quieter but equally curious, developing a love of books that delighted her mother. 2 years after Catherine's birth, Rose had twin boys, James and Daniel, who kept the entire household busy with their boundless energy. Rebecca eventually remarried, a widower named Henry Fletcher who owned the feed store in Sacramento. Henry was kind and patient, good with Thomas, and respectful of Rebecca's independence and her commitment to the ranch. They built a house on ranch land, close enough to remain part of the family but separate enough to have their own space. Rebecca and Henry went on to have 2 daughters, further expanding the family. The ranch became known throughout the Sacramento Valley as a well-run operation and a close-knit family enterprise. Cole and Rose were respected in the community, known for their fair dealing and their support of local causes. Rose's school grew until the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the permanent teacher. Cole served on the local Cattlemen's Association and used his influence to push for fair practices and good land management. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole and Rose took a rare day away from the ranch, riding up into the foothills to a spot that overlooked the valley. They sat together watching the sunset, reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought them together. "You ever think about that broken stagecoach?" Rose asked, leaning against Cole's shoulder. How everything changed in a single moment, all the time, Cole admitted. I think about how I almost rode past it, how I could have convinced myself it was not my problem. And then I think about everything I would have missed if I had, you, our children, this life we have built. I was so scared that day, Rose said. When you proposed, I thought you might be insane. I thought I might be insane for agreeing. Cole laughed, the sound warm and familiar. We were both a little insane, but it worked out better than either of us could have imagined. I love you, Rose said, the words as true now as they had been that night under the Nevada stars when she first spoke them. I love the life we have built, the family we have made. I would not change a single thing. Neither would I, Cole said, kissing her softly. You were begging for passage west, and I was heading west anyway. Asking you to come as my wife was the best decision I ever made. They sat together as the stars began to appear, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love. Below them, the ranch spread out in the gathering darkness, lights beginning to glow in the houses where their family lived. It was more than Cole had dreamed of when he inherited this land, more than Rose had imagined when she stood beside that broken stagecoach desperate for a way to reach her sister. They had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, built love from practical necessity, and created something lasting and true. The Wild West had been hard and dangerous and unforgiving, but it had also been the place where two people met and chose each other, and made a life together that honored that choice every single day. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, when the ranch had expanded to over 1,000 acres and employed a dozen hands, Cole and Rose would still ride up to that overlook on their anniversary. They would watch the sunset and remember the beginning, and they would give thanks for the broken stagecoach, the cowboy heading west, and the desperate woman who agreed to become his wife. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, an example of how courage and kindness and taking a chance on someone could lead to a lifetime of happiness. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Cole and Rose built together from that improbable beginning on a dusty Colorado trail in the summer of 1873. Catherine inherited her mother's love of teaching and opened schools throughout the Sacramento Valley. Thomas took over the cattle operation and expanded it further, becoming one of the most successful ranchers in California. The twins went into business together, starting a freight company that helped connect Sacramento to the rest of California. All of them married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and life. Rebecca and Henry had a long and happy marriage, and Rebecca always credited Cole and Rose with saving her life when she had been at her lowest point. She never forgot that they had welcomed her into their home and their family, giving her and Thomas a place to heal and thrive. She made sure her daughters knew the story of how their aunt had crossed the country with a cowboy she barely knew, building a love that would sustain not just them but everyone around them. Cole and Rose lived to see their grandchildren grown, their ranch successful beyond anything they had imagined, their family healthy and happy. They remained partners in every sense of the word, working together, supporting each other, finding joy in both the big moments and the quiet everyday ones. When Cole died at 83, peacefully in his sleep, Rose grieved deeply but without regrets. They had been together for 57 years, and every one of those years had been a gift. She continued to live on the ranch for another 5 years, surrounded by family, teaching her great-grandchildren to read and telling them stories of the Old West and the journey that started everything. Rose passed away on a warm spring morning with the scent of wildflowers drifting through her window, Her last words, spoken to Catherine, who sat beside her bed, were about Cole. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him I kept my promise. I came west with him, and I never regretted a single moment." They buried Rose next to Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a spreading oak tree they had planted together on their first anniversary. Their headstone was simple but meaningful, engraved with the dates of their births and deaths, and a single line that said everything about their love story. She came west with him, and they built a life together. The ranch continued for generations, each one adding to what Cole and Rose started. Their story was never forgotten, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from choosing courage over fear, from being willing to build something new with someone who started as a stranger but became the love of a lifetime. And it all began with a broken stagecoach on a Colorado trail, a desperate woman needing passage west, and a cowboy who said yes, "Come with me, come as my wife." From that simple beginning came a love story that lasted decades, a family that flourished, and a legacy that endured for generations. It was the kind of story that proved the Wild West was not just about danger and hardship, but also about opportunity and courage, and the extraordinary things that could happen when two people took a chance on each other. Cole and Rose Michaels built more than a ranch in those California foothills. They built a partnership based on respect and affection, a family rooted in love and loyalty, and a legacy that showed what was possible when two people committed to facing life's challenges together. Their story became the foundation on which generations built their own lives, always remembering the cowboy and the schoolteacher who met on a dusty trail and chose each other when they could have chosen to remain strangers. The ranch still stands today, still in the family, still bearing the Michaels name. And every generation that works that land knows the story of how it began, with a woman begging for passage west and a cowboy who offered her not just a ride, but a partnership, a marriage, and ultimately a love that would outlast them both and create something beautiful that continues still. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of courage and adventure, hardship and perseverance, and above all, the kind of deep and abiding love that comes from two people who choose each other every single day and build a life together, one moment, one choice, one shared dream at a time.